Hello, and welcome to Just Jack, a progressive sports podcast. I'm your host, Jack Minnick, and on today's show, I'll be talking about LeBron and the Lakers, the Antonio Brown saga, and Harper and Machado's nightmare of a summer. I'll also be speaking to Jimmy Bay about coaching youth sports, and I'll have a top 10 you won't want to miss. Stay tuned for this and more right now on Just Jack. Just Jack is brought to you by our KCA Surf Company. From clothes to hand planes to custom-made skateboards, our KCA has what you need. Stay grounded, disconnect, anticipate the feeling. Our KCA Surf Company.
Just Jack. Just Jack. Just Jack. Just Jack. Just Jack Show. Yeah.
All right, let's get into it. Starting out with the big three.
Number one.
All right, so the first thing I wanted to talk about today was LeBron and the Lakers and how they won't be making the NBA playoffs. Don't really want to do a story about the NBA playoffs because I think they'll be pretty boring. Steph Curry and the Warriors will run the gauntlet in the West, I believe, and Milwaukee will run the gauntlet in the East. I know, hot take, both conference leaders, number one seeds in the conference, are my pick for the finals. But, I mean, it's just pretty obvious that the Warriors are just too good, and they'll be winning their third championship in a row. As far as the most interesting story in the NBA right now, it still has to be LeBron, even though he's on a non-playoff team. Everybody's talking about, what this does to his legacy, him quitting on defense these last couple weeks, all these kind of different things. He's had a really rough news cycle these last couple weeks since the All-Star break especially. And I just think it's so funny because I've heard a lot of takes talking about how this failure in the West so far takes away everything he's done in the East because it was so much easier and the teams aren't as talented and the playoffs aren't as deep, and the early round series that he was playing over there are way easier than what he would be over here in the West. And all that is true. The West is substantially better than the East. This has been the case for years and years now. But the thing is, to say it tarnishes his legacy of what he did going to 8 straight finals is just insane to me, because he took teams that, especially last year, the Cleveland team, they had no business beating the Celtics. I know the Celtics didn't have Kyrie, but the Celtics were the better team. But LeBron made sure in that series against the Pacers and in the series against the Celtics that he was going to get to the finals with that team. And everybody's saying, well, if he can do it with them, he can do it with the Lakers. People have to remember how bad this Lakers team is. They have not made the playoffs in years. They have some young talent, but, I mean, they're growing, I guess. But I am a little biased because I hate the Lakers, obviously. But I do have to say, I just don't see what people are in love with Kyle Kuzma about. The only young Laker I really like is Brandon Ingram. I think that dude can ball. But other than that, I don't think Lonzo brings a whole lot to the table. I don't think, especially Kyle Kuzma, I don't get the obsession with Kyle Kuzma. Caldwell Pope is okay. They traded for Reggie Bullock, who's okay. They just have a bunch of mediocre guys, and the veterans they brought in aren't good enough. I love Rajon Rondo. I think he was a great signing for them, and I think he would have been a really instrumental piece in the playoffs had they gotten there. But like guys like JaVale McGee, he's serviceable, but you can't get to the playoffs with as bad of a team as he's on right now. I implore any superstar in the league currently, or even Michael Jordan, put them on this Lakers team. None of them are making the playoffs. They're not good. There's a reason they've missed the playoffs, and there's a reason they've been on the bottom third of the Western Conference for years now. I don't know why everybody... I mean, I do know why everybody had these high expectations. It's because it's LeBron. But once they didn't get Anthony Davis, it was pretty much locked in that they weren't going to make the playoffs, and they go out and lose to Memphis. They go out and lose to the Pelicans twice, I think. And that was pretty much wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. This past loss to the Clippers really sealed things. And it's just so funny to see everybody talking about how this is tarnishing LeBron's legacy and, can we even look at these past 8 years, 9 years, 10 years of his career in the East, and what does it really mean, all this stuff. And I just think people either like LeBron or don't like him at this point. Opinions won't change. I don't think people who respect him and like him as a player think that just because he had this year he's not going to make the playoffs with a terrible team, that he's not the greatest player in the world anymore. I think he's definitely trending downwards as the greatest player in the world. I think there are people that will overtake him very soon. And I think the concern that the NBA has about the ratings is also a real thing. Since LeBron left the East and went to the West, the ratings for Eastern Conference games especially have been absolutely abysmal. Ratings all around the league have been down, but especially Eastern Conference games on TNT and ESPN have just been down hard. And it showed that the Eastern Conference was purely about LeBron, and the Western Conference has a little more diversity. That being said, Giannis has excited a lot of players this year. I don't think he'll ever be as good as LeBron, of course, but he brings a lot of excitement to the table. The Celtics are kind of too dysfunctional to bring anything entertaining or worthy of watching. I think the closest thing is Toronto with Kawhi, because that team's really good. I don't think they'll make the finals, and I can't imagine Kawhi staying there, even though it seems like he's had a pretty good year. They've let him rest when he wants. They've let him play when he wants. They've limited his minutes when he needs. They've kind of catered everything to him, but I just don't think he wants to be in Toronto, and at this point irrelevant. I mean, if you look at his numbers, he's having one of his best seasons. It's just nobody really cares, one, about the Eastern Conference, and two, especially about Toronto, just because we've seen what Toronto's done in the playoffs these last couple of years. But going back to LeBron, the Lakers, I think this summer they're going to need to get at least one player with a name that could still be Anthony Davis. A lot of people are talking about Klay Thompson. I don't know why Klay Thompson would want to go to the Lakers. I don't see the incentive. Anthony Davis, on the other hand, leaving the Pelicans, obviously he's going to get out of there because of how all this kind of went down. But I think that Anthony Davis gives you the best chance of winning out of kind of available superstars. I think he would complement LeBron well, and I think he would bring a lot to that Lakers team. And if Anthony Davis had been on the team when the trade was trying to happen and will be on the team next year, I think that's a playoff team. But as of now, to expect this Lakers team to go to the playoffs is kind of silly, just because they really don't have a lot of depth or just flat out talent. I'm sorry, Kyle Kuzma is not that guy. He's an okay role player, but everybody talk. I mean, partly because I'm in Southern California, I hear it a lot more. But I swear, people make him out to be the next Michael Jordan. And in some ways, they talk about him. But what I've seen is a terrible defensive team, especially recently, and it's just It's like if LeBron had joined my favorite, the Suns, and then they didn't make the playoffs, everybody would be like, oh, how do you not make the playoffs? Well, it's the Suns, and they're garbage, and they have no talent. And the Lakers haven't been much better than the Suns in all actuality, especially when they lost to the Suns the other night. That was hilarious. But who have won 3 straight, by the way. Yeah, so I think that to say that this tarnishes anything he's done in his career is silly. I think, like I said on this podcast before, people either love LeBron or hate LeBron, and nothing he can do for the rest of his career will change that. So I think that he will make the playoffs next year because they will get a superstar, because it still is the Lakers, and I think this conversation will kind of be put to bed. Now, that being said, with the Lakers, I don't think he'll win another championship just because of how deep the West is, and I don't see the Warriors breaking up anytime soon. So we'll see about that. But, I mean, as long as he's making the playoffs, winning a series or two in those playoffs, I think that's a good way to go out.
Number 2.
Next up, we'll talk about Antonio Brown and the way the Steelers have kind of handled things. Late last night, it was announced he was going to be traded to the Oakland Raiders for a 3rd and a 5th round pick, I believe. That's a pretty good deal for the Raiders. To essentially what they did is swapped Amari Cooper for Antonio Brown, which is, in my opinion, an upgrade. I mean, Amari Cooper kind of went off at the end of last year, but I think is an upgrade at that position. I think they need a lot more help than that. But I think his personality will be great for the move to Vegas. I think it's good that the Steelers were able to get rid of him, and I think it'll be good for the Raiders. But that's not what I wanted to talk about in terms of his situation. I wanted to talk about how the Steelers kind of handled things. I think that a lot of sports talk and a lot of media members have talked about how much of a diva Antonio Brown is and how poorly he's handled this situation, all these kinds of things. And I just cannot disagree more, because I think that all the fault lies within Pittsburgh. I think if you look at the way they've treated their two stars, Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, over this last year and a half, it's obvious that they have no value in any position or anybody other than Ben Roethlisberger, who is a C-plus quarterback nowadays. Obviously, he had his time and stuff, but at the current moment, I would describe him as a C-plus quarterback. And Antonio Brown, one of the things he said in an interview after he announced that he wanted to trade was that Ben Roethlisberger has a owner mentality, which totally makes sense. I mean, he definitely has a say in who stays, who goes, and how important players are. But ultimately, I think it's just big-time mismanagement by the Steelers on two, in my opinion, the greatest players in the NFL right now. I mean, Le'Veon Bell, who knows how he'll be when he gets back, but as he was at the beginning or at the end of last year, he was the best running back in the league, and I can say that now, especially seeing Todd Gurley, what he did in those last two playoff games when he was non-existent. Le'Veon Bell brings a new depth and dimension, and everybody's so hyped on James Conner and the excitement that he brings, and ultimately they didn't make the playoffs with him. So this team, I don't think, is a playoff team next year as it is now. I think that they're going to need a lot of help. Losing Antonio Brown and Le'Veon, their offense suffers a lot. They do have some pretty good receivers still, but I have no faith in James Conner as a real option. I think that he can get some numbers and he does some exciting things, but he's not a real superstar like Le'Veon was. So I'm just frustrated because I feel like the mismanagement of the Steelers has led to this attitude of Antonio Brown being a diva and whiny, and he should be grateful for the opportunities he has. And I pretty much always lean on the side of the players. I think that Antonio Brown is the second best receiver in the league right now. I'm still a Julio Jones guy. I always have been, partly because he's on my fantasy team. But I just think that Antonio Brown is worth, and everybody talks about what's the true worth of a good wide receiver. But I mean, you see that he is not only one of the best route runners, but he has some of the best hands. His value in the league is so obvious to me, and I think that he can bring so much to a team beyond kind of other receivers' abilities. And I think that the fact that Pittsburgh put no value in him and no value in Le'Veon just shows that they're not interested in working with players. A lot of what Antonio Brown's talked about is respect and how he felt like nobody on the Steelers respected him. And I agree with him. I mean, Big Ben was calling him out constantly for different things, especially after one of the games. After Ben threw an interception, he called out Antonio Brown for bad route running, which for a quarterback to call out a receiver after a pick is, especially someone with the experience that Roethlisberger has, you have to know, like, even if it is a receiver's fault, which it wasn't on that specific play, but even if it is, you can't call him out publicly. That's so disrespectful, and it's being a bad teammate. And so I think that it's a problem on Ben's side. I think the Steelers are going to be bad now, and I think that people need to lay off attacking Antonio Brown so much.
Number 3.
So finally, I'll talk about Bryce Harper and Manny Machado's offseason. Machado with the Padres, Harper signing with the Phillies, both contracts in excess of $300 million. I'm fine with the amount they got paid. I think a 10-year deal for Harper is stupid. I think it'll be good for about 3 or 4 years, maybe 5. But then you have 5 years of ridiculous money for a player who will be in his mid-30s, late 30s. The contract will expire when he's 39, which is insane. There's a no trade clause. There's a no opt-out clause. He's so locked in for 10 years. I get it's a lot of money, but I just don't think it's a good deal. The Machado deal, I think, is a little better just because I think the Padres needed to show people that they were serious about competing and that they really do care about winning. But ultimately, I think this summer and the drama that was them two was a nightmare for the MLB and a nightmare for baseball because it has just been, I mean, they finally signed with about a week before spring training. Harper, after spring training, already started, and it was an ongoing process. People thought they were going to sign in January and February and even some in December, but they didn't end up signing until late February, early March. And what it's taken away from baseball is baseball was so irrelevant for those months where neither of them were signing. They could have brought some big stories out and could have made some really interesting headlines. I think the NBA does the best job of this, of making their offseason exciting. And ultimately it was bad. And another horrible aspect is for every other MLB player who obviously wasn't as big of a name, who was sitting on the free agent block waiting for signings. Other teams didn't want to make signings until they knew, where Harper and Machado were going. So a lot of people that had opportunities kind of lost them, or they changed and shifted, didn't know where they were going. And it was unfair to them because of how much drama there was with Harper and Machado. It was a bad look for baseball, and I think that things need to be done in the offseason to change the rules about when players have to sign by, just like in the NBA and the NFL, just so there's a certain timeline that teams have to follow on these things. All right, joining me now is hair icon, former basketball superstar, at one point was called the next Chandler Parsons, Jimmy Beh. I say Beh because it's B-E-H. How do you pronounce it?
Bay.
Beh.
Bay.
Oh, that's so boring.
Like B-A-Y.
I like Beh better.
Yeah. Buh.
Jimmy Buh.
Jimmy Buh.
What's the worst you've ever gotten?
Mr. B.
Really?
They didn't even try to say it.
Mr. B. Okay, so, yes, Jimmy. The reason I brought him in today is he has a lot of experience in coaching youth sports, especially lacrosse. And I just want to talk a little bit about that because I've coached a youth basketball team for like 8 games, season in the winter a couple years ago. So I don't know much about it, and I've always been curious because I think youth sports are the kids of tomorrow, and molding them is an important role. Okay, so anyway, Jimmy's here. Let's talk. So how did you get started with when was the first time you ever coached a team, period?
I would have to say I did Special Olympics for 10 years, and I worked as a community partner and then also a coach.
Mm-hmm.
That role is, I think, a little different than traditional youth coaching.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I got involved in coaching.
And when did that start?
2000 and like early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
I started doing it when I was maybe 12.
Yeah.
And did that through going to high school, and then came back in the winters for the first 2 winters and did it then too. And then I kind of transitioned out here. I took like a year off, didn't really do any coaching, and then I had a family friend who was the head lacrosse coach at a high school here in San Diego.
Yeah.
And he needed someone to coach the littlest of kids learning how to play lacrosse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just working on eye-hand coordination. So I did that for a spring, and then helped with the middle school.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of where it snowballed. I think the first time I had a full team and I was the head coach, I was a junior in college. And
Gotcha.
they were...
So was that 1982 or something?
75.
Yeah.
1975. Good year. Summer of 69. No, that was probably 2000... it was the spring, so it was 2014.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's separate the two roles, and I'll start with the Special Olympics. What specifically was your role? You talked about coaching and mentoring, but like what kind of things did you do?
So, where I grew up, I'm from Washington D.C., and the Shrivers are the ones who created Special Olympics.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, from the part of the Kennedy family.
Yeah.
And so they went to my church growing up.
Oh.
So Marie Shriver was actually a quote-unquote family friend, and so her grandkids were community partners with me at the same church. And so our other family friends who went to college, my parents and their parents both went to Georgetown together. And they had two sons who were 2 years older than me that were twins, and they were autistic. So I started being like a buddy. It was like a buddy system with them. And so I'd help them play basketball if they needed help shooting, getting rebounds, whatever, just kind of assisting them while they played. And so that's kind of how Special Olympics started. And then it, as I got older, went from being just like a buddy system to kind of a community partner where we'd plan practices and reserve different facilities and do stuff like that. And then towards the end, I was more of an organizer. So it kind of evolved as it went on. And we expanded the program to a wider range of disabilities and a wider range of community.
So what was the most rewarding aspects of that position? Like what did you learn from it, and what did you gain?
I think a lot of it was just perspective. I mean, these kids, it's only like 12 weeks out of 52.
Yeah.
And, they don't get exercise or to feel the rush of success like that in a lot of other facets of their life. And so it was a very interesting circumstance. You can go out and shoot hoops and feel great exercising, or most of us can, whenever we want.
Yeah.
And this was something these kids had to look forward to for a week. And we only did it for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Even if their strength lasted that long. We had different games and different drills. But yeah, just kind of how much we take for granted our ability just to go physically make ourselves happy.
Yeah, for sure. So what was the toughest part of that experience?
I think anyone who works in that Special Olympics field, at least in one point in their life, has to ask, why me?
Yeah.
Like, why was I not? Why did this happen to them, and why did it not happen to me? But I think the most powerful thing is like how happy those kids are.
Yeah.
Like more than you would ever be. Like it's just this very interesting perspective where like, they can't even shoot a basket at the 10-foot hoop, but I remember there's one kid that had cerebral palsy that was in a wheelchair, and we would put it on her like kind of desk in front of her wheelchair, and she would backhand it off into the trash can, and she would smile for like the next 3 hours.
That's so awesome.
So it's like, I've made buzzer beaters in real competition games, and I never smiled that long. So it's just kind of like
I like that humble brag right there. Oh, I mean, I've made some, game winners, clutch moments.
I've made one, and it was a JV game. It wasn't anything crazy.
But the greatest part of my life is giving back to the people who put me there. It's like interviewing a real athlete. Anyway, so
in my dreams,
let's transition a little bit. It's so funny that you say that because I feel like being from San Diego, La Jolla Country Day is a private school.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that some of the characters that you were coaching weren't nearly as grateful for the time they were there, and they may be excited to be out on the field, but we're kind of taking it for granted, just kind of like what you said. Is that true at Country Day?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the one thing that I kind of felt, and also my background, I went to an all-boys prep school that was very highly competitive. We send a lot of guys to D1 programs across sports. So it's a very talented program, and kind of the mentality I grew up with, both in my family and in my high school, was that if you're not going to do it our way and you're not going to work hard, then we'll find someone else because other people want to be here. If you don't, what I found out here in the private school system was that the player or the student felt really entitled into the point where it's like, well, what's my role? Why aren't you using me more?
Interesting.
Why aren't I focused on more?
Yeah.
And although you might be back in DC, back at Gonzaga, there may have been focus and more attention, and obviously, someone who went to Duke was not getting attention like
Yeah.
me playing JV ball. But obviously we know one's better than the other, more special than the other in terms of athletic ability. But they're not whining about their role.
Yeah.
And I encountered some freshmen on varsity at times who would complain to the coach. They would come in and say they're not being utilized enough. And it just was this weird. Parents would get involved, complaining
Interesting.
about kind of the roles that coaches were playing and how they weren't. It was a lot of me.
Yeah.
My son's special. Why don't you pay attention to him more?
Yeah.
And it was I guess you could sum it up to being more individual based than team based.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that was permeated across the private school league. It wasn't something unique to Country Day. I think we found it in most other places.
And I'm sure that's not too unique to San Diego either.
Probably not.
Yeah,
Probably
that's
not.
interesting. So when you would have these parents, because I think this is one of the most important aspects of youth coaching youth sports, when you have these parents who are coming to you in youth sports are so political nowadays that if you're not playing year round, you're not really playing that sport.
Absolutely.
That's why Little League is kind of suffering a little bit. But what would you do with these parents who pay oftentimes hundreds and thousands of dollars towards lessons and stuff, and then maybe their kid doesn't get as much playing time and they're freaking out about it? How do you have those conversations?
Well, it's easy for me because I went through it. My parents paid a handful of money to train me and to do this, that, and the other. And our high school team was top 25 in the country when I was a rising junior. And I didn't make the team. And it's like pretty uncomfortable. As a player, you kind of feel like a failure.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's because of the isolation and focus on like the year-round aspect and sports being everything, we lose sight of the fact that like they're not.
Yeah.
That's why I think playing more than one sport is really important because it gives you perspective. It also can make you better, reduces injury to some degree because you're not reusing the same muscle constantly.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, reminds you that it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
Above all other things, I think AAU and basketball has really taken a very corporate trajectory. Football is obviously suffering from CTE and other such kind of physical harm aspects. And then, you mentioned Little League earlier. But I think expanding the sports that you play, trying new things is nothing but more beneficial. Some of the best athletes I've ever known have been 2 to 3 sport athletes.
Yeah.
And it's because they transitioned seasons that they were able to get back in the flow easier. It was just more natural for them to kind of do that. I just think that with the way sports are kind of shown now, it's like you have to have a one-track mind or you don't care. And I think that's just like a dangerous mentality to have.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I know people say it all the time, but it is a game.
Yeah.
And you should have fun with it, but you should also have other hobbies in your life and
Yeah.
I think also kind of to your question, it's dangerous to be so obsessed with one sport because a major setback in that sport may make you feel like it's challenging your character or who you are as a person.
It's your identity.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I think the mentality you bring to sports can be tied to your identity because that's your work ethic and your personality. But I don't think the success within the sport should be tied to your identity.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that is being pushed. I didn't think of it like that, but that perspective is really interesting. So other than encouraging more athletes to play more sports, which I completely agree with, I had a coach in high school, a JV baseball coach, who was encouraging us to only play baseball, and I was so uncomfortable with that because first of all, baseball was my least favorite to play in high school, but also it just, like, I don't know. It just didn't feel right. And it didn't feel like he should be, as a mentor, saying these kinds of things. So, anyway, the question is, other than encouraging athletes to play more than one sport, what are other ways we can reduce the stress and the politicization of youth sports? Because I feel like in a lot of ways we're taking the fun out of sports for kids. And so I wanted to know what you think would be another good solution, if you have any others, other than encouraging them to play more than one sport.
Right. It's interesting because it's youth sports. A lot of the mentality is instilled and not necessarily self-created.
Interesting.
I would say. I don't think, like, for example, I was listening to something that LeBron James was saying the other week, talking about when he was in high school, and he was lapping kids in his practice. I mean, like, he got there before them, stayed after, was just spinning circles around him in drills, and his coach kept telling him, like, it wasn't good enough because he knew he could do better. And so it's like this kind of idea that, like, we don't know we can do better unless someone, like, says that, or we don't know we should work harder unless, like, we don't often know our limits. And there's times to be pushed to your limits, and there's times to be pulled back from your limits. And I think we're focusing too much on pushing to the limits. But I mean, on top of that, like, just kind of what a kid can do if he feels like everything's being hyper focused. On that is, get out and play pickup. I think that's kind of the joy or the rawness of most sports. Go to the park and play pickup basketball with kids that are good or bad, better or worse than you. Just go, like, it doesn't have to be serious. You don't have to win. It's not, just go have fun. I always loved playing just, like, tackle 7-on-7 football on, like, a dirt patch in a park or something. Lacrosse is a little tougher to play. You need a little more things. But you could do that with soccer. Get the little tiny goals from, like, Dick's Sporting Goods. I think that kind of makes it more holistic. If it's away from coaches, if it's away from this, like, it's
less of a job.
Yeah, you're still working out, you're still getting better, quote unquote, but it's for the fun of it. There's no, you're not checking a box, or you're not on an attendance sheet, and you're not counting calories or whatever the hell.
It's a nightmare.
So going back to coaching lacrosse at Country Day, how did you balance, and it might be different because you were coaching such young kids, but how did you balance the teaching aspects versus winning, like actually trying to win games? Like,
gotcha.
I'm assuming your job didn't rely on you winning. Like, I'm sure they didn't look at your record as a middle school lacrosse coach.
They didn't bring it up in my review. No. So I did lacrosse at a elementary school and middle school level. I did football at a middle school and high school level, and I did basketball at a middle school and high school level.
Gotcha.
And so each sport varied a little bit. Lacrosse specifically was much more about organizing the kids and making sure they had a good time. It's not a popular sport on television. It's not as culturally popular on the West Coast.
Especially on the West Coast,
in some areas it is. Like Denver has a really good team. They won the national championship. In certain areas of San Francisco, it's starting to blossom, but not in Southern California as much. So it's really kind of like teaching them the fundamentals and, like, making sure they have fun and kind of making sure they understand the game. My job is much more to make sure they have a grip on the basics for the next level, so that they're in a position to succeed. Basically. So that's kind of my goal. It's kind of like, I guess the way I always thought of it is like trying to change. If you think of youth soccer, it's trying to change it from the one kid kicking the ball and the pack following that kid to them passing to each other.
I totally remember that.
So that's kind of like the way I thought about the lacrosse. But I think football is a better example when I coached middle school. So I was a gym teacher for the middle school. So 5th and 6th grade. And so we had a flag football team. All the kids wanted to do well, obviously. I actually was coaching what you would call the quote-unquote C team. And so it was hard. You know, you had to balance the competitive nature of everyone. I was coaching only boys, so it was like the kind of early puberty age of comedy and aggression and all of that.
What a nightmare.
So there was a lot of things to balance. So, and it's kind of the point too that I found out that kids start to separate themselves athletically.
Yeah.
So a lot of the complaints I would get from parents would be like, well, he's played football with him his entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Why is he on the A team and my son's on the C team?
Yeah.
As if something's wrong with his son.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, it's not the case, but this is the time. Like, you know, first of all, sir, he's 6 foot. Your son is maybe 5'3".
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, that's just an objective. Like, you can't recruit. As a coach that I knew would always say, you can't recruit size. So, or you can't teach size, I should say.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's difficult. I think the things you have to focus on is, again, making sure that they're enjoying themselves. I think oftentimes people underestimate challenge them intellectually is a big factor. Like anyone, if they're able to accept that challenge and overcome it, you have like a sense of you're elated.
Yeah.
And so by doing that with, you know, I think sometimes people think just because they're younger, they don't understand. And I think babying someone in that scenario makes them kind of resent you or not want to participate more, rather than talking to a level where they have to like rise up to how you talk to them. You know, so I think that was helpful.
Cool. So, putting age aside, if you had to coach one sport for the rest of your life, what would you coach?
If I could coach one sport, I mean, surfing would be cool because I could sit on the beach all day. But I think on a more serious note, I would probably, you know, it's tough. Like the answer's always been basketball.
Mm-hmm.
But with the rise of AAU and, you know, the NBA is flourishing more than any other major sport. But the AAU makes it tough because I think one aspect that I really like about sports is the connection that sports have to cities or to institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's unfortunate about AAU is it kind of removes a sense of loyalty because it's not attached to anything besides a brand or a sponsor.
Yeah.
And so it just... I know it's here to stay, you know, but it's just, it feels disingenuous in that sense to me because there's no fan base, there's no connection, there's no, you know, if he's not getting playing time here, we'll put him on another team. Like, it just feels like you're not playing for anything but yourself, and I feel like there's more to play for in sports. Although you're, you know, doing yourself a service is obviously part of it.
Yeah.
But it just it seems different than the history of sports and why sports have been around.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean, I can't say. You know what? I'll go with soccer. I don't know a ton about soccer, but I think the challenge would be really fun. I think it's a sport that's just going to grow in the United States.
I agree.
And I think there's something also to be said about being outside in the sun and on a field. That's kind of what I enjoy about lacrosse too. So I think that would be better than spending the next however many years I got in a gym. Getting paler.
So if I remember correctly, you were also a part of the organization Coaching Core or coaching.
Yeah, Coaching Core for a brief time.
What was that like?
It was interesting. I was more of a kind of a support for a coach, but I liked it because it was like an outreach in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of creating a team and creating like a community around a team, kind of like Special Olympics, where it's like, you know, the kids feel wanted, they feel that the coaches are invested in them, and regardless of the record, it's just much more of an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to come out and play and participate and have, I mean, what you try to be for these kids is more of a good role model than a good coach.
Yeah.
I think. And I think it was really rewarding just to kind of see the joy that people had just coming out to games, making it an event on the weekend, you know, not just sitting inside watching TV or not just going to, you know, a major league sports game, but actually participating in an organized event.
Yeah.
There's something just innately fun about that.
Yeah. So, with your experiences coaching, what is one lesson that you can remember that the kids have taught you?
The kids have taught me. Well, I think I talked about the Special Olympics kind of lessons pretty well.
Yeah.
I think I think one thing that every level I've taught or coached has reminded me is that, like, never take yourself too seriously. I think the worst coach is the one that isn't staying human in that role.
Yeah.
You know, we all love to watch the movies like Miracle or something where, like, the coach is just such a rigid leader, and you know, but you also have to remember in that movie that he had his assistant coach be best friends with the players, because without that relationship you can't really maintain that seriousness. So I think not taking yourself too seriously and remembering to laugh, and that you're also building a relationship with them. You're not just, it's not all about you teaching them. It's about both sides growing.
Yeah. Cool.
So, yeah, just remembering to laugh.
All right. So this is something we do for every guest. I would like you to tell me your favorite sports memory, whether it's a time when you were playing, a time when you were watching a live sporting event, or interacting with sports in any way.
Okay.
It's intentionally vague. I just like hearing what people have to say in terms of their favorite sports memory, because part of the reason I love sports so much is because of, like, individual memories that you can think back on.
Right. I've had a few. I've had a few. I'll give you two viewing and one.
Perfect.
I'll give you a top three.
Cool.
So, in no particular order. The first one I think I went to, which was the coolest, is I went to the record-setting game of Cal Ripken.
When he set the record for most consecutive games started or whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
What a random
it was like
record to have.
It was like over 2,000. It was something absurd. It was just cool. The energy in Baltimore was just incredible. And that was before the Nationals were in D.C., so it was pretty cool. My dad took me to that. The second one, both my parents went to Georgetown. I've been going to Georgetown basketball games, having season tickets since the year I was born. And the one time my dad missed a major game, Georgetown upset Duke when Duke was number 1 at home. My dad was at the Pinewood Derby Cub Scout race with my brother. My mom took us.
That's so funny.
And that was when J.J. Redick was on Duke, and Georgetown had Jeff Green and Roy Hibbert and Jonathan Wallace, and they beat them at home. It was amazing. Best basketball game I think I've ever seen, where your team comes through.
Was it a close game? Do you remember?
It was a close game. They won by maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Beating J.J. Redick.
They were top dog.
It's a memory of a lifetime.
It was absolutely incredible. And then so playing, I had a lot of good memories playing sports, all different kinds of sports. I think my favorite was, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I did hit a buzzer beater in a JV game. It was tied. It was going to go to overtime. It wasn't like we were down 2 and I hit a 3 to win by 1.
Yeah.
I hit a 3 and we won by 3. But it was just cool. It was like, it was a JV game. It was a bunch of my buddies. We were all the same year. And it was just really, really fun. Our varsity team was incredible that year. The year before we won the DC championship, the city championship, our league championship. I think we won the Alhambra championship. Like they were like 35-1.
Yeah.
But it was just cool. And the varsity guys, like, were all stoked on it. I mean, the team, we were playing a team that wasn't great. We should have won the game by more. They weren't like, whoa, you upset someone.
Yeah.
But it was a cool feeling.
So take me back into that moment. Did you, like, come off the dribble? Did you get a pass? Like, was it off an inbounds play?
So I remember my buddy David Planning, who played lacrosse at Ohio State.
Shout out David.
Was Davey was the point guard. David, whenever we would play in JV, would always get really pissed. Like he wouldn't say flustered, but they would score a basket and he would get pissed. And I would always be inbounding him the ball. I'd be like, deep breath, David. Like, chill, dude.
Relax.
Like, and so it was kind of funny. But anyway, he passed me the ball. I remember I was on the wing. We were running our offense. He passed me the ball. I pass it back. And then he goes, no, and passed it back to me again. And then I knew there was no time, so I just jacked it and made it, and it was kind of funny. I wouldn't say that I didn't want to take the shot, but I thought he was open, and then he just was like, no, you have to shoot it.
Like, no, you're shooting it.
If I passed it back, it would have looked really
What was
bad.
your celebration?
What was it? I think David and I just jumped up at each other, and then like some other teammates came over. I mean, it wasn't like, I think we were all excited, but it wasn't anything crazy.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into a little rapid fire.
Cool.
So we have our arbitrary ticking noise
Okay.
that doesn't actually count down anything. It's just here to stress you out while we do the rapid fire questions. But I'm going to list off some questions. Some are about sports, some are about life in general.
Okay.
And you just give the first response that comes to your head.
Okay.
I'm going to start snapping if you're taking too long. All right? Are you ready?
I think so.
We're going to start in 3, 2, 1. Who's your favorite DC sports team?
Ooh, the Nationals.
First sport ever played?
Baseball.
First stuffed animal's name?
It was an alligator. I never named it.
Favorite fast food restaurant?
Right now, In-N-Out.
Age you were when you had your first kiss?
Ooh, 11 or 12.
Best part of being in a frat? What was, excuse me.
Camaraderie.
Favorite non-alcoholic drink?
Water.
Best thing to do for a first date? Don't say a movie.
No, it's not a movie. And it's not dinner either. Go somewhere. Go on somewhere outdoors.
Vague. Oh, no. First date will go somewhere.
It depends on the person. It's not.
Go somewhere as opposed to go nowhere? I don't know. Favorite school colors?
Blue. No, it's a lie. Purple. Purple and white.
Yeah.
Go Eagles.
Biggest sport goal as a kid?
Oh, my first goal was without a doubt to go to the MLB, but I blew up my arm.
Oh, you would have been there. Thing you bring on an island if you were deserted on an island?
A surfboard.
Oh, God. And the question we use, everybody, the most used app on your telephone?
It's got to be a tie between Instagram and I have this game where the balls destroy these blocks up on the. It's literally a tie.
Well, thanks for coming in. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, to end today's show, I will get into my top 10. It is the top 10 most entertaining athletes off the court or off the field. The 10 athletes that I think are the most engaging off the field, whether it be in press conference interviews, whatever. We'll get into it. Starting with number 10 is Usain Bolt. I think he's hilarious. If you watch a lot of the press conferences and interviews he does, he jokes all the time. He doesn't take himself too seriously. He's playing soccer right now professionally just to kind of joke around with people. Apparently he's pretty good, but I think it's just because he's Usain Bolt. Another funny thing that happened to him is, I don't know if it was the Olympic. I think it might have been the 2008 Olympics or maybe the World Track Championships. There was a cameraman on a Segway, and the Segway, he lost control and ran into Usain Bolt, knocking him over. And everyone panicked for a second because it looked pretty bad. Like he could have gotten really injured. And he could have gotten up and been all mad and stuff, but he turns around and starts joking with the guy who's obviously super embarrassed because not only did he hit Usain Bolt, but he fell over dramatically with this big camera falling on top of it. It was hilarious. Number 9 has to be David Beckham, the former soccer star. He's not funny, really, but what's entertaining is he's like a full-blown celebrity, A-lister. He's married to an A-list celebrity, and his kids are becoming A-list celebrities in their own. He's a fashion icon and has made probably a more lucrative career off the field as much as he made on the field with all his sponsorships and all the fashion work he does. Number 8 would be Serena Williams. She's also secretly funny, but the reason I think she's so entertaining is she's so well-spoken in her press conferences, and she talks a lot about kind of progressive issues sometimes. I think that she gets a lot of bad press because some of the reactions she's had on the court. I mean, the whole thing that happened at the U.S. Open was one of the most entertaining things of tennis in the last 10 years, and it had nothing to do with the actual game itself, really. It was all about the call and kind of the trophy ceremony afterwards. So that was really an engaging, interesting part of her and adds to her story. I mean, the first time I was exposed to anything Serena Williams off the court was when she was called for a foot fault and said she was going to stick the racket up the referee's ass. And then the referee went over and was like, that's a penalty. She's like, I didn't say that. It's so funny. One of the greatest videos to watch. Number 7, I know everybody's going to hate this, but it has to be LeBron James. Space Jam 2 is coming out. He's producing and starring in Space Jam 2, which everybody loves Space Jam. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how the sequel goes, because I feel like people don't want the sequel, but especially with LeBron, because a lot of people like to hate LeBron. He's now moved to LA, obviously, and is totally involved in that entertainment life, producing a bunch of stuff for HBO. And he's going to be, I think, again, like Beckham, more lucrative in his off-the-court kind of adventures, I guess, with especially that he wants to open a production company for film and television. So I think that he's a real kind of big player in the entertainment industry right now. Number 6 is Blake Griffin. He is hilarious off the court. I'm a fan of his on the court too, but off the court he does stand up a lot. He had his own show at the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival in Toronto. And he has appeared on a couple TV shows, including Broad City, and his appearance in that was hilarious. He's super funny, just as good of an actor and stand-up as he is a basketball player. And I think he will have a career in comedy after he retires from basketball, because he is just so funny. Number 5 would be Allen Iverson, because of the antics that he had off the court during his career. People couldn't take their eyes off of him. I mean, he's one of the most exciting players to watch on the court, but then off the court, he was, what a lot of people like to call a diva. Had a lot of moments, but obviously the most famous moment being the press conference when he was talking about practice, and we're just talking about practice. It has to be one of the most entertaining press conferences of all time, and he had always been kind of a name for himself. After he was in the first season of the 3-on-3 league that Ice Cube runs now, and he was an entertaining force in there. Number 4 would be Manny Ramirez, Man Ram, as he was known. He was just crazy. He was a very good baseball player, but he was just crazy. He kind of had the slogan, Manny being Manny, anytime he did anything stupid. His most famous on the field stupid moment was when he double cut a relay from the outfield when it needed to not, he had to dive to catch it, and it needed to not be cut off. He just wanted to be involved in the play. Another moment he had on the field was when he caught a fly ball jumping into the wall and high-fived the fan in the front row, and then turned around and threw the guy out for a double play. One of the most entertaining highlights of all time. And then while I was doing my research, I found a story that I thought was hilarious. One time after getting pulled over by a cop, the cop says, "I'm going to give you a ticket." He says, "I don't need any tickets. I can give you game tickets." Which is so funny because it's so stupid, doesn't make sense. And then apparently after that, he pulled off, did another illegal U-turn, and got pulled over right away again, which is just, Manny being Manny. Number 3 is T.O., Terrell Owens. He has to be in the top for most talked about athletes of all time. He was his own story every second of his career, and even after his career, most recently doing his own Hall of Fame. He was elected into the Hall of Fame, and instead of going to the ceremony, he did his own ceremony in his hometown with just himself, and I thought that was genius. But I'm going to read a couple T.O. quotes that I think are some of my favorite. The first one is just, "I love me some me," which is such a great quote because it's simple to the point and very T.O. He said, "Yes, I am a narcissist, the best one too." So genius. And then one of the most famous moments of T.O. is actually not as funny as when he was having a press conference after the Cowboys lost a playoff game and everybody was criticizing Tony Romo. He got emotional and said, "That's my quarterback. That's my man. That's my quarterback." And it just, he's wearing sunglasses and you can't see his eyes, but you know he's tearing up and he's emotional. And it was just kind of a rare moment from him, and it's still so entertaining. Number 2 is also a football player, Chad Ochocinco, also Chad Johnson, another wide receiver. He entered the league as a personality. He left the league as a personality. He's still a personality. And he still kind of finds a way to get into the news even well after his retirement. So his name is Chad Johnson, and his nickname was Ochocinco because his number was 85. He wanted the NFL to let him put Ochocinco on the back of its jersey, but they said only legal names can be on the back of his jersey. So he went and got his name legally changed to Ochocinco, Chad Ochocinco, which is genius. Genius way to get back to the NFL. Any way you can take a jab at them, I'll be supportive of. And it's just one of the funniest things I've ever seen. He has started things like the Ochocinco News Network. He just thinks that he always wants to be in the limelight. And 2 quotes that stood out to me from him that are hilarious are, "There are 3 things certain in this life: death, taxes, and 85 will always be open," which is hilarious. And then the other quote that I love of his is, "The bad thing is he has to cover me. The good thing is he can save 15% by switching to Geico." When he was giving an interview or in a press conference or any kind of public appearance, you had to watch, you had to listen, because he was going to say something hilarious. He was going to say something crazy. On the field, he was going to do something crazy. I mean, him and Terrell Owens' celebrations are some of the best of all time. And you just couldn't take your eyes off of them when they were talking or even playing. And then finally, number 1, I think most people would agree with this, Shaq Daddy himself, the Diesel. He is the most entertaining off the court athlete of all time, just because everything he's done. I mean, he's done movies. He did Shazam, which was hilarious. He does a show on TNT with Charles Barkley and the NBA postgame and stuff, and that's hysterical. He's also a DJ. He was at Kaboom Music Festival a couple months ago, and he just kind of has found a way to incorporate himself in all kinds of different facets of entertainment. One of my favorite Shaq stories of all time is, I'm pretty anti-Lakers, especially anti-Kobe. And he, after Kobe lost in the finals to the Celtics in 2008, went on stage. It was the first finals that Kobe had been in since him and Shaq broke up. And as you probably remember, that breakup was pretty vicious. There were a lot of words thrown around. They did not like each other. I don't think they still like each other, but especially at that point. And so Shaq had won a championship without Kobe. Kobe got to the finals, lost without Shaq. And so Shaq came on stage. It was a TMZ video, so the quality's not great, but you can hear it clearly. And he was on stage of some concert. I don't know if he was just featured or whatever, but he came out and did a rap about Kobe. And he said, "Last week, Kobe couldn't do without me. Kobe, tell me how my ass tastes," which is the best line you can ever say to anybody. I mean, Kobe had just lost in the finals, a really close, hard-fought finals. And the week after, Shaq's coming out rapping on a stage saying, "Kobe, tell me how my ass tastes." There's never been a better athlete off the court than Shaq. I don't think there ever will be. He's one of a kind. He's also an amazing player too, but he's just like Tio and like Ochocinco. You can't step out of the room. He's also had some problems. He, called the Sacramento Kings back when they were in a series with them, the Sacramento Queens. He had some racist comments about Yao Ming we won't get into, but ultimately he just brings the party. He's a fun guy, and you got to watch him when he's off the court. And hope to see you next week. Bye. Just Jack is brought to you by our Acacia Surf Company. From clothes to hand planes to
to custom-made skateboards, our KCA has what you need. Stay grounded, disconnect, anticipate the feeling. Our KCA Surf Company.
Just Jack. Just Jack. Just Jack. Just Jack. Just Jack Show.